tonal values in watercolour painting. Why are they so important, and how can you use them to your advantage to improve your paintings? That's what we're going to look at in this video. Welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name's Michelle, and on this channel you'll find watercolour and mixed media painting and drawing tips and techniques, also business and social media training for artists, so please do consider subscribing. So if you've ever walked around one of those mixed exhibitions, perhaps a little exhibition in your local church where there's all sorts of stuff in there, you've got every subject and medium under the sun, you've got really work that's not very good at all, rather amateurish looking, alongside work that really is, you know, almost professional standards. So have you asked yourself, what's the difference? What actually physically makes one look much better than the other? Now, there are lots of reasons, your drawing skills, painting skills, even framing. But I can tell you that the main thing, usually with these exhibitions, the main thing that's making those other paintings look not quite as good as the more professional work is a lack of tonal contrast. So I'm going to show you a couple of colour swatches. So I've got this one here, and look how easy it is to see one area to the other. Of course they're different colours, they're purple and green, but if I show you this one here where I've got less difference between the tones, it's much harder to see one between the other. So if you were to look at them in black and white, this one would show up much more than this one, and that's what we're looking at, because we've got so used to seeing colour everywhere that when you start learning to paint, it can be easy to think that just using a different colour from one area to another is enough just to make those areas look dramatic and look strong, but it really isn't. You have to consider tonal contrast. So later in this video I'm going to show you 10 ways of sorting out your tonal contrast so that you get that more professional, more dramatic look to your paintings. But before we look at my 10 ways of improving tonal contrast in your paintings, I want you to ask yourself this question. Do you ever get halfway through a painting and resort to a pen, a watercolour pencil or some kind of liner? Now what happens to me is I'm walking around my art class, and you know, halfway through class and people have started putting some paint on their drawings, and somebody always says to me, oh, do you think I should use some pen on it? It's not looking very good. Do you think I should use some pen? Now that's a big indicator. The reason you're wanting to reach for the pen halfway through when you hadn't even considered it at the start of your painting, the reason you're wanting to reach for the pen or the watercolour pencil halfway through is the areas aren't clear, and they're not clear because of lack of tonal contrast. So let's look now at 10 ways of sorting that out. Now the first thing you can do to improve your use of tonal contrast is to just occasionally challenge yourself to work in one colour only or in black and white. So you could use a pencil and have a pencil sketch, or you could perhaps use charcoal. But what I like to do is I torture my students with this a couple of times a year actually. I make them work in one single colour. We did it this week. We did old houses from photographs, and I only allowed them one colour. They could choose any colour, but I did give them some guidance, because it's no point using colours that are very weak or very pale, because you won't get a full range of tones. You also don't want to be using really warm colours like red for this, because it's just a bit hard on the eyes. So what I suggest you use is either a grey, something like a strong Payne's grey is a good one. I think Daniel Smith does a graphite grey, that's pretty nice too. You could use a brown, maybe a burnt umber, not technically a staining colour but pretty dark. Sepia is a great one to use. You get colours called neutral tints, somewhere between a brown and a grey, they can be good too. Or a dark blue. Dark blue is great, so you could use Prussian blue or indigo. You want that strong staining blue. You could even use phthalo blue. It's a little bit bright, but you know, if that's what you fancy doing, then have a go. So challenge yourself to work in one colour only. So why is this so important? Well, if your sky is blue and your house is blue and your people are blue and the road is blue and the bushes, everything's blue, you've only got the amount of light and dark, the amount of water that you use in your watercolours or lack of it, to show the difference between areas. So working in one colour is a brilliant thing to do. It will force you to have correct tonal values. So the second idea I've got for you is a really simple one, and it will make you look very silly, and that's just to squint your eyes. So if you're looking at you know, a real scene or a photograph, and you want to see where the lights and darks are, what you want to do is squint your eyes, literally like the cat has just jumped on the work surface with muddy paw, sort of like this, you know, like you look at your children when they're making too much noise, just squint your eyes like that. What this does is it reduces the light levels, and then everything that you're looking at is reduced to just lights and darks, and you'll be able then to see the areas which are dark and the areas which are light, and it just helps you to get your tonal values right. It's a very simple thing, but have a go and you'll be amazed how well it works. So the third idea I have for you is to make what they call a value strip. Now you can buy these, but equally you can make one yourself. What you do is you cut a strip of watercolor paper and you get a sort of a dark neutral shade of paint. Don't use black, but you want to use something that goes very dark. So Payne's Grey, sepia or neutral tint would be your best friends there. And you just literally start painting with barely a hint of colour. So you can see I've just got, you know, a tiniest bit of colour, and then I go right up as dark as it would go. Now I've actually lost the one that I keep in my box, so I made this one this morning. I would actually do more stripes than that. I'd probably do about 10, and you want to get it as far as possible in a sort of an even transition. And what you can do then is you can use this to judge values. So what you do is you get perhaps the photograph you're working from, or even your own work, and you lay this on. Now it's important when you paint to go right up to the edges, not to stop with a sort of a bit of white around. So you're laying this on, and what you're looking for is, you're looking for, say if we do the sky here, you're looking for the one that's closest in tone. Obviously the colour's different, but you're looking for the closest in tone. You can see it's really quite dark. If you can't tell which one is closest, then again squint your eyes and you'll soon see which one is the closest, and it just helps you to look at various areas of your subject and see which is the closest tone to it. Obviously you can't use it if you're painting from real life, but you can actually place it against your work, and that will help you to sort of see how light or dark the paint is, and just give you an idea of getting that full range of lights and darks, because within every painting there should be a full range. If you look at your value strip and nothing in your painting goes beyond sort of halfway up, it never gets very dark, then you're missing a trick for getting lovely tonal contrast and drama in your painting. At number 4, and this is another thing that you can make yourself quite easily, is what I'm calling, I'm going to call it an isolation card, because it isolates a small area of your painting or the photograph that you're working from, and it's just basically a square with a hole in it. So you want to use something that's pretty opaque. I mean, if you're in the middle of an art class and you haven't got anything to hand, you can just use, you know, any scrap of white paper and cut a hole in the middle, just fold it in half and chop a little hole in the middle. It doesn't have to be neat and square like this one, but this one is made from watercolor paper. If you want a more permanent one to put in your box, then a bit of white mount board would be the thing. And how you use it is you can just place it on the, say, the photograph that you're working from, to sort of, it's hard to see whether an area is light or dark, so you can place this on top and see. For instance, it's easy to look at these clouds and think, well, they're very light, but actually, you know, if I place my value strip on them, well, they're not so light, are they? So it isolates an area and allows you much more easily to see the tone of it. You can use it in conjunction then with your value card. You can place that alongside it. It's actually really good as well if you have areas of colour, when you are working in colour and you just have no idea, you've got some sort of neutral colour and all the other colours are kind of affecting it. I mean, I'll talk more about this in colour mixing videos, but it's a great way of isolating a colour too and seeing what that colour actually looks like without all the other colours interfering with it. But in this case, I want you to use it for judging your tonal values. So tip number 5 is, maybe you are printing something from your computer, a photograph to use as your source material, print it in black and white as well, and just have a look, and then you can see very clearly the areas of light and dark. Now you shouldn't do this every single time, because you just you won't become very instinctive about using tone if you do that. And of course you need to be instinctive about using it. It needs to become second nature, because if you're working outdoors and you're working from real life, you can't be printing a black and white photograph of that necessarily. You can perhaps do it on your phone. You know, you can take a picture on your phone if you've got some kind of app, and you can reduce the colour. You know, it's a good thing to look at there. So it can just help you to see those lights and darks. If you're a little bit confused about tone, have a look at your subject in black and white. Now the sixth idea I have for you is to do what they call a thumbnail sketch with tonal values. So thumbnail sketches, they're not usually the size of a thumbnail, they're usually you know, a couple of inches by a couple of inches perhaps, but they are usually done to work out the composition of a picture before you start painting it. However, they can also be used for tone, so you can kind of map out the basic areas of tone, particularly useful in big things like landscapes and houses and things like that. So here's one I've done, and it's really, really scruffy. This is not a neat thing. This does not have to be, you know, a masterpiece. So here's your picture. And here we've mapped out the tonal values, so you can see, you know, various things like I'm looking at, I need the sky dark so I can show up the light clouds, but of course as I come down, if the sky continues to be dark, then I'm not going to see these dark trees. So again, as the sky comes down now, it needs to be a little bit lighter. And I've got other areas, so I'm using tone not just to show the difference between areas and to show the drama in the picture, but I'm also using the tone as a sort of a compositional device to take the eye into the painting. As I said, I'm just scribbling this. This is watercolor paper, which is awful for sketching on. It's something that you can do in 2 minutes. Just lay down your tones before you start so that you can see that everything in the finished picture is going to be clear to the viewer. So we talked about looking at your source material in black and white, your subject, looking at it in black and white to see where the lights and darks are. But this is something you can do retrospectively as well with your own paintings. So when you finish a painting, have a look at it on your computer in black and white. There should be a way of going into your graphics program and reducing the light levels. If you just Google the program that you've got and ask how to do it, then it should show you how to do that. There's various ways of doing it. It can be really, really useful to do this. Now, maybe you've got some work that worked really well, and maybe you've got some other paintings that didn't work as well. Have a look at them in black and white, and the ones that are not so good, is there a lack of tonal contrast? When you reduce one of your paintings to monochrome, to black and white, can you still see everything clearly? Is it still clear to the viewer, and have you still got drama in your painting? If not, then that may be a sign that you're not using tonal contrast as effectively as you should be. So with our thumbnail sketches, we talked about planning lights and darks from the beginning of your painting, but this is something you should do as you begin painting as well. You want to be thinking ahead all the time. Watercolour is a little bit like a game of chess. Now, you generally want to work light to dark, but if you're putting a background in, say you're putting a background behind an animal, for example, where the edges of the animal fur is light, you want to put your background in dark, and where the edge of the animal is dark, then you move the background to being a bit lighter in those areas. So you're kind of planning the tonal contrast ahead. If you've got a white house, you know, on the top of a horizon, then you want to get the sky dark around it right from the start. So be thinking right from the beginning when you're placing areas in. Think about the area that they're adjacent to. What do you need to show up against them? So if the object that you're going around is light, then make sure that you're going around dark, and vice versa. So be planning those values right from the beginning. Of course, you can adjust at the end, but if you've got some idea of it from the start of your picture, and if that informs every bit of paint that you put on the painting, you're going to get a much more successful outcome. So the ninth thing to think about is the art materials themselves. If your paint or your pencil just doesn't go that dark, then you've got no chance of getting those strong tonal contrasts. I've known people use things like raw umber exclusively for their darks. It's not dark enough. So what you need to consider with watercolours is you need to have a few staining colours in your box. Now, weak colours like raw umber and cerulean and lemon, those are lovely colours, but you don't want to only have colours like that, or you'll never get those strong dramatic darks. So what you want to have is a few of those staining colours. So the most commonly used ones would be things like Payne's Grey and Prussian Blue, things like Permanent Blue Violet. So those really, really strong dark colours, you just want a few of those in your box, and you mix them with other colours, and it'll enable you to get those darks. Now, if you're working in pencil, you want to consider the grade of the pencil. So the softer the pencil, the softer and blacker the line will be. So as if you've only, you know, especially if you're working, you know, there's no point trying to work exclusively in HB. It's just not dark enough. So if you've only got an HB pencil or a 2B pencil, you want to have a full range. You don't have to have every single grade, but you want to have 1 or 2 nice dark pencils. I've usually got 4 or 5B. You can go right up to 8B. Some ranges even have 9B, and then you'll get those real strong darks. So look at your materials and consider if they go dark enough. Now this goes for paper as well. Not so much with watercolor paper, but when you're working on pencil and cartridge paper, you want to look at the surface of the paper itself. Some of these very cheap cartridge papers that you get from the stationers, from the drugstore, can be rather shiny. If you've got cartridge paper that's rather shiny, you may find that no matter how hard you press or how dark your pencil, you just can't get those strong darks. So do invest in some good quality cartridge paper. Although it still feels fairly smooth, it shouldn't feel shiny, and it should have, you won't be able to see it, but it's got a little bit of a tooth on it, a slight bit of roughness. And what this does is it grabs the pencil and ensures that you can get those real strong darks. So look at your materials and make sure that they do actually go to that full extent of darkness. So idea number 10 is something that will require willpower, but it will make a huge difference to your paintings. So I want you to vow never to pick up a pen or a watercolour pencil to outline things with halfway through your painting. Now I'm not having a go at pen work. I often work in pen and wash. Line and wash is a great medium. If you decide that you are working in pen and watercolour, that's a decision. You've decided which medium to use, go ahead. However, if you've decided to just do a watercolour painting and halfway through you start wanting to reach for that pen, it is always a sign that your tonal contrasts are just not good enough, because nothing's working. It's not looking very clear. You haven't got that drama. You can't see one area against another. So what do? You grab something that will outline things and that will show them. Well, it works to an extent, doesn't it? But it's never going to make your painting look very good. So if I want you to vow just to continue in the medium you start in. If you hadn't intended to use pen at the beginning, or if you hadn't intended to use watercolour pencil at the beginning, don't pick one up halfway through in an attempt to rescue your work. You have to have a bit of bravery with watercolour, because watercolour paintings rarely look any good halfway through, because that's when all the sort of the lights and the midtones are in. As you go through and you get darker and you add those darks at the end, then it should come together. So don't be too hasty to grab a pen halfway through because your work's not working. And spend the last few minutes of your painting adjusting tonal values and just looking for anywhere that's, you know, light next to dark. Could I lighten one area? Could I darken one area? If you don't know how to remove watercolour paint, then I've got a nice video for you which I'll link to at the end, which gives you 10 ways of adjusting your watercolour painting after your paint is dry. But that's what you want to spend the last, when your painting is almost finished, have a look and consider just ramping up that tonal contrast in a few areas. You can be careful with this, you can go too far and make everything look a bit crazy, but that's what you want to be doing. When it gets to the point you think, oh, I don't know, does it need anything else? Just 1 or 2 touches, 1 or 2 areas of strong darks against strong lights, particularly in focal points. You know, the area where you want people to look the most will make all the difference to your painting. And don't pick a pen up halfway through. So I hope, in addition to giving you lots of practical tips of how to improve tonal contrast in your work, it's just made you a little bit more aware of this really important subject. If you need more help with your painting, do feel free to pop over to my Facebook group. It's exactly the same name as this YouTube channel, and you'll find lots of other artists there to chat to. I'll be very appreciative if you can like, share and subscribe to my channel, and you can watch another one of my watercolour videos right now.